Welcome, Dolphins fans, haters, and everyone in between to your favorite show discussing the greatest franchise in sports, the Miami Dolphins. This is the PhinsPod. My name is Moose, your host, and it looks like we're getting some attention from the national folks. Peter King of MMQB and NBC Sports recently had an intimate sit-down with both Chris Grier and Brian Flores. A lot of interesting tidbits came out of those conversations and clues for us to figure out exactly where the leaders of this Dolphins organization's heads are at, as well as their expectations for the overall roster in 2021. Without further ado, let's dive in.
When Miami traded from 3 to 12, I don't even view this with the Dolphins, quite honestly, as being a gutsy trade. If somebody offers you to move down, you're not going to take a quarterback, okay? And somebody offers you to move down 9 spots, 2 future ones and a future 3, you'd almost be committing malpractice if you don't do it.
If you haven't already, I really do encourage all of you to check out Peter King's article about the Dolphins and their front office approach. And it's clear if you read the piece, as well as hearing King's podcast and his own words about the matter and the article itself, that there's clear synergy between Coach Brian Flores as well as General Manager Chris Grier. And I say that not just because Flo was hired by Grier, but over the last 2 years, they've shown to have a shared vision in the players that they bring in, how they speak to the media about their vision, as well as the messaging that's being delivered to the players. When we hear them speak, yeah, they're saying kind of those boring cliche answers, control what you can control, we're focused on this week, one day at a time, one thing at a time. Yeah, it's boring, but it's true, and it's the way that the Dolphins have gotten better as the season progresses. And the guys they're bringing in fit that culture and share that mindset. And there's a reason for that. Brian Flores is not just an X's and O's football guy. He started his post-playing career after he graduated Boston College and obviously never was really able to make it playing in the NFL. But he went to the league as a coach, but started first as a scout. That's actually where he started his career. He was shaped from the perspective of team building and roster building. That's what he did when he started in New England. He spent years working in scouting and evaluating players to build the roster. And that's important. He first looked at how to fit players to spots that suit their team best, as well as the players and maximizing what they can do. He then transitioned after years in scouting and finding and identifying talent. He then transitioned to working with that talent, to coaching. And that's where he really thrived. And it's due to his relatability and his overall teaching skills. I think that's been made apparent. Players are just drawn to him and they respect him. Despite his rise in the coaching ranks, the way that he looks at team structure, it's far more holistic than a lot of other coaches in the league. And that's to our benefit. And it's exactly from his overall development in New England when he started as a scout. Here's a quote from Coach Flores in the piece. Quote, "You mentioned that philosophically, coaches are about today and not about the future. I guess I'm more in tune with the future. When I get into my coaching short-term thought process, Chris pulls me out of that. We listen to one another and have good collaboration on everything, especially the roster. We have a similar vision for what we want the team to look like." End quote. That says it all right there, and it's definitely good to see. It's refreshing when you consider the tension-filled coach-GM relationships of the past. Jeff Ireland, Dennis Hickey. God, I always forget about Dennis Hickey and that he even existed. And then Mike Tannenbaum, of course. None could ever really click with a coach, and there were a few over that duration. It seems things are clearly different right now in the way that the Dolphins are operating up top. And this article from Peter King really does illustrate that vividly. And look, that can't bode for the worse, considering what we've come from, how low the Dolphins were, and where we currently stand as a team, the progress that's been made with this vision that they speak about. King also touched on Chris Grier's fearlessness when it comes to moving his assets around and how that's kind of a new philosophy in the modern NFL. A lot of guys used to be more scared of trading future first, and they were considered extremely valuable. Miami's shown that they're willing to move assets if they feel that they can help the team right now. And he made quite an interesting point. And I think that this just goes to show how willing that Chris Grier has been to pull that trigger. And if he thinks, like I said, that the team can improve with one move, albeit a risky move, giving up future assets, he's going to make it without hesitation or remorse. If it involves cutting a player, trading a player who you maybe have promised a role to, but that role doesn't exist anymore, they don't care. They're going to move on, and they have no qualms about it. So John Lynch, the 49ers general manager, in the piece, he actually had a cool quote about Chris Grier and his overall, and I think this says a lot about his overall approach. He says, quote, "I love dealing with Chris. He's not emotional about it, and his word is everything. Chris is a rock," end quote. In the last 3 drafts, so the entirety of the Flo Grier era, Miami has traded 19 picks in the first 2 rounds. And obviously the Laramie Tunsil trade plays a huge role with having that many assets to even move. But Miami did not just hoard those picks. They easily could have. They moved around, traded up, back, and sideways to get the guys that they felt best fit that culture and vision for a championship caliber team. Peter King, alongside his recent access to the Dolphins, has plenty of close experience and a solid relationship with the 49ers brass. So he was actually able to get both sides on the deal, which was executed back in March, which allowed Miami to move from 3 to 12 and then back up to Philly, with Philly to number 6. And the story goes down that the Niners came to Miami early in the process. I believe it was March 4th, like Peter King stated, John Lynch first reached out to Chris Grier about moving up. And the Niners told Grier that they were absolutely willing to give up 12, as well as their first-round selections over the next 2 seasons. The Dolphins, hearing this, were very pleased, and they told the 49ers that they liked what they heard and were definitely interested in doing business. Again, the Dolphins were not going to take a quarterback and knew they could still get a good player, as well as a boatload of picks. But then, pretty soon after the offer was made, Brian Flores made his feelings known, and upon his film study and evaluation of not just his roster last year and what was needed, but the players that were available, he felt like where this team was, it was vital and it was pivotal that the Dolphins ensured that they got a weapon, right? So they could have success. And at 12, if they stayed and they moved from 3 to 12, none of the top options would be available. So at that point, before finalizing a deal with San Francisco, he spoke with Grier and he wanted to make sure that they had a plan to get back up into the top 10. And they put the Niners on hold and began calling around to those teams in the top 10. And they knew that in order to guarantee one of the top 3 guys, they needed to move up ahead of the Lions, who were picking at 7, and they were desperate at the position after losing Golladay and Marvin Jones at free agency. So if a Jalen Waddle, Jamar Chase, or potentially Devonta Smith fell, they were worried the Lions would take them. We obviously know the Lions went with Penei Sewell, but again, that could just be because it was Devonta Smith or Penei Sewell, and, Dan Campbell does not want a super skinny wide receiver as his first pick of his era. I think Penei Sewell fit the mold of what I think he wanted. So in hindsight, they might not have had to move there, but again, they had to just deal with the teams that were willing to deal with them. So they called their good friend Howie Roseman, who held the 6th pick, the Philadelphia Eagles GM, and they have done plenty of business with Howie Roseman and the Eagles in recent years. And then they decided to strike a deal, except the deal that the Dolphins had to make with the Eagles required sending an additional 3rd-round pick, which they did not have. The Eagles were not just going to take a first. They wanted a bit more. They were shaking Miami down. They knew Miami was desperate for that skill player. And they said, we'll just stay here and take who we want. So Miami knew they had to get that pick. So they called Johnny Lynch back up, and they told him that they would do the deal, but only if they threw in a 2020 or a future 3rd rounder. And the Niners, knowing that they wanted to get this deal done with Miami so they could focus on the quarterback position and make sure that they got their guy and had enough time to do proper evaluations, begrudgingly agreed, and Miami put the deal into motion. The Niners jumped up to 3, where they eventually got Trey Lance, and that's a pick which I believe is going to be proved to be well worth it. I do think Trey Lance can flat out ball, and in that system, it's sitting a year behind Jimmy G, ideally, or at least majority of the year, developing, learning, acclimating, getting comfortable with the reads in Shanahan's system, which again are pretty simplified for a quarterback, which means it might be easier for him to transition. But you give that kid with those physical tools time to develop, sheesh, watch out, NFC. Honestly, for years to come, they could be a dominant force if Lance hits his ceiling. And then Miami goes from 3, they drop to 12, but then they flip their own 2022 first, which they felt was expendable now that they had the Niners 2022 first, to the Eagles. And that 3rd rounder that they had gotten from San Fran to boot was added onto that deal to finalize everything. And with that, they moved up to 6 and were able to get a talented skill player. And listen, I know I have stated that these were two separate moves. That's how I viewed it, and I still think that they are objectively two separate moves. Miami could have just said yes to San Francisco and taken 3 first-round picks, which is still more than enough, and not fought for that extra third, which they needed to move up, right? And Miami's thinking, right, makes it obvious that these moves in their minds were done in unison. But that's their feeling based on their needs and the reason they moved up to 6. And Flores obviously wanted to make sure they got someone. But hypothetically, if there weren't that many skill players and there were only 1 or 2 really talented receivers, I don't think Miami would have forced the issue at 3 and not taken those first-round picks. Miami values those picks very much so. We can tell from the way that they have operated. But it was clear that they felt that they didn't need all of those picks and they needed to strike right now while the Dolphins were on the rise. And so look, Miami, if they feel like that's what they need to do to address their needs, who am I to double check? And we're going to get into it, but it seems like Flores is very, very happy with how things turned out. But we're going to be able to look back, right, and look at the decision to move up to take Waddle 4 or 5 years from now, and we're going to know if it was worth it, giving up that extra first for a top 10 receiver who Peter King himself mentioned was at best a 50-50 proposition, considering recent history and how difficult it is for top 10 receivers to actually live up to that draft billing. But this is where things kind of get spicy. King revealed that the way in which Flores was speaking about Waddle, the way he talked to King about how he was going to be utilized and his specific skill set, it made it seem that the Dolphins truly did have him, Jalen Waddle, as their number 1 wideout on the board. I disagree with that. Jamar Chase is better. I still think Devonta Smith can prove to be a better receiver. But if you like Jalen Waddle more, that's fine. But he's not better than Kyle Pitts, who is a pass catcher, and Jamar Chase, who I think will prove to be a dominant force in the league. But if you look at these words, and obviously Flores and Grier were probably talking wonderful things, saying wonderful things about Waddle, saying how he's going to impact them all over the field, right? Whether you believe this or take it for the spin that all teams do put on their picks after the draft, hey man, we wanted this guy the whole time. He was our number 1 guy on the board. We're a lot smarter than everyone else, so believe us. It's a shtick, right? That front offices have been doing with the media for generations now. But when you listen close to what Flores was actually telling King, the substance of what Flo was saying, the reality of them having Waddle as that top guy becomes far more believable. Flores went on about how, from a defensive perspective, from the perspective of a defensive coach, Waddle was a nightmare and a headache wrapped into one. Flores stated that he was a guy that defenses would have to account for on the basis of his game-breaking speed as well as his run-after-catch ability. 2 guys would be covering him. That's nearly mandatory, and that helps your offense immensely when you have a guy who's already demanding two defensive players. And if you do dare put 1 corner on him, just put the slot corner on him in the nickel. We'll see how that goes for you. Miami's going to intend on making you pay and targeting him in open field and making sure you double cover him, allowing them to open everything else up. So the other part, which kind of bled through from his love for Waddle's ability and his spacing of the field and how that's going to help the entirety of the offense, it's the overall direction that Miami's going in offensively this season. And we've spoken on it before, but they're likely going to look a lot more like Alabama, honestly, of the last few years. RPO concepts, quick reads and dishes from Tua, shots being taken liberally to force opposing defenses to stay honest, as well as making sure that you have speed at nearly every level of the field. The Dolphins took Tua Tagovailoa with the 5th overall pick in 2020 and are now making sure that they build an offense that suits his skill set best. And there's going to be a lot of pressure now on Eric Stoodsville and George Godsey to make sure that they call good, clean, and explosive games which can utilize their new toys to the best of their abilities and help the Dolphins offense succeed. And that expectation, that's bleeding from the top. It's evident in Flores' words. And speaking of Flores, Peter King was very impressed. You could tell by the way he was speaking about him. And at this point, it isn't really surprising, too, considering how he's proven to be a leader, a great leader. Players love playing for him, that's clear. Guys from New England are now coming back, and the only ones who aren't happy about it got their asses cut by the Dolphins, Kyle Van Noy. He's shown to be an amazing game planner, and he's carried himself the way he's carried himself as the representative of the Dolphins organization has just been pure class. I think every fan right now has no issues with the way Brian Flores has. Maybe some issues with some of the coaching moves. Some people wish that they never pulled Tua, wish they kind of put Tua in a bad spot, might have rattled his confidence. I don't really buy any of that. I think Flores, he knows exactly what he's doing and has done a damn good job. But I don't think any fan, even potential haters, which I don't know how you could be right now, but if you're out there, even you would know that Brian Flores is someone that is representing the Dolphins organization with the utmost respect and class. But Peter King made a comment, on his podcast, and it was subtle. I could very easily be reading way too much into this, but he mentioned how he spoke to Jimmy Johnson, Hall of Fame head coach, and Flores pretty close in time, and they both had the exact same foundational principles when it came to the draft and team building. You can make all the damn picks in the world, move up and down the board, finding great perceived value, right? Fill needs as you see fit, but at the end of the day, if you can't coach them up to play, and then the players you get don't perform, and most importantly, if you don't win, then none of this matters. It's all about winning. And now that is something I can get behind and something we need more of in Dolphins Nation, winning. And I feel very good about the direction that the Dolphins are heading in right now. What about you guys? How do you feel about Miami after 3 drafts with this new regime and 2 seasons of play? Still concerned about a potential backslide? Maybe they overachieved and are going to come back to earth? Or are you feeling and buying into the hype? Are you feeling it in the air? Because there's clearly, the way Peter King spoke about the Dolphins, he made it seem like he thinks they're going to be right there with Buffalo. Personally, I think we're taking the division this year. It's our trajectory has been honestly extremely high, so I understand why people think there's going to be a bit of a plateau. But again, Tua was a rookie last year. He's going to take a step. If he doesn't, he's a bust. So we have 2 choices here. Tua's a bust, or he takes a bit of a step, and the Dolphins will improve drastically. So how are you feeling? You buying into the hype? Or are you still a bit of a hater? Let us know in the comments if you're watching on YouTube or over on social. Follow us there at PhinsPod.
If you look at, let's just say, 4/5 of the offensive line, the quarterback, the biggest offensive weapon, they've all been on the team for 12 months. And so, and look, Flores and Grier are very, very clear. These picks, they're our team. And, if the line is leaky or Tua stinks or whatever, they're in trouble. So, a lot of things have to go right. But right now, I'd put the Dolphins number 2 in the division.
That's going to do it for us here today. Thank you guys so much for listening to the PhinsPod. Hope you enjoyed it. Thank you to Timothy Ritchie, member of the pod and supporter of the show on Patreon. If you want to check that out, the link's in the description or patreon.com/PhinsPod. Really, really appreciate it. Thank you guys so much for the continued support over there. And please remember to like the video if you enjoyed the show. Leave a rating if you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. That helps other Dolphins fans find the show and help us never miss a chance to chat about the Miami Dolphins. Remember that the PhinsPod's available on all platforms: Spotify, Apple, Google Podcasts, and of course, YouTube. Continue the conversation with us over on Twitter and Instagram at PhinsPod. I hope you all have an amazing day. Until next time, stay safe. Love y'all.